Shalom, everyone. This is Avi Lipkin here in Kedar, Israel, my home. This is a special broadcast for the Prophecy Watchers virtual conference, and I'm very, very pleased to be with all of you. Um, this is a subject about the return to Mecca, or the case for Mecca, about the phylacteries, about the prayer shawl, about where Mount Sinai really is, the exodus from Egypt. All of these things are interconnected in a period going back 3,500 years. And I'm very honored that Pastor Gary and Bob Ulrich have invited me to do this. But to tell you the truth, I need hours to do this teaching. We have 1 hour for this Zoom broadcast. And so I'll try to be concise with the most important parts of the teaching. The first thing I wanted to say is that we are all interested in truth. We are all seeking the truth. And many times it happens, and when you study history, that the history that you study has been contaminated by people who have different subjects, different interests on their mind, and don't go specifically to this kind of a subject. And fortunately or unfortunately for me, I'm the only one really who's talking about this subject in a very, very open manner. Um, as you all know, I'm Jewish, I'm Israeli, I'm American, I'm a Zionist. It's very interesting to note that the book, Return to Mecca, I'm selling a lot of these books now to Saudi Arabia. And I don't know where they found out about it, but it seems like the word is getting out. Um, and my Saudi friends, my new friends in Saudi Arabia, are saying to me that we're very, very happy to find a Jew who can teach a subject without being prejudicial to all of us here in Arabia. And so, with that, I think I will begin. As you probably know, young Jewish men, when they reach the age of 13, have what is called a bar mitzvah. The bar mitzvah is a ceremony of the coming of age of a young boy now becoming a man. And one of the things that we do as young Jewish boys and girls is we learn to put on the prayer shawl and the phylacteries. And many, many Christians, this is a program specially designed for Christian people. Many, many Christians do not know what phylacteries are. They may know what the prayer shawl is because Jesus performed many of his miracles with the prayer shawl, but very few people know about the phylacteries. And of course, if you fly to Israel, you will see when you're flying into the sun, at some stage you're going to fly into the sunrise, you're going to see Orthodox Jewish men going to the back of the plane. And now with the COVID-19, they've got to basically just sit in place. But you're going to see Jewish men putting on the prayer shawl and the phylacteries and doing the morning prayers, the morning ablutions. And you might be shocked to see this, and you might not know what it is. So one of my purposes is to show these two paraphernalia, the prayer shawl and the phylacteries. A very, very interesting point is that when I was 41 years old, I went for an MA program at the Jewish Theological Seminary to become a conservative rabbi. Very simply, I was not accepted for the rabbinical track, but they allowed me, thankfully, to do an MA program. And so I had 3 very, very wonderful years at seminary. It was actually the 3 happiest years of my life because I was smothered in God's word the whole time. One of the very, very first classes in my first of 3 years was about New Testament, uh, reconfirming things that we know from the Old Testament. And the very, very first verse of the New Testament that we were taught was Matthew 23, verse 5. And Jesus says in Matthew 23, verse 5, for all their works they do for to be seen by men, they make broad their phylacteries and they enlarge the hems on their garments. Now, hems on the garments are the tassels which you find on the prayer shawl. These are the tassels. And in those days, and even today, there's some people who wear like a cloak with the tassels. And so this is how it was in those days. And this is, they make broad their phylacteries. And in a moment, I'm going to put on the phylacteries. And it's very, very important to see this. This is not a program about show and tell. This is a program about understanding Scripture. And a lot of Christians read the New Testament faithfully, but without really understanding what we're talking about. So here you see phylacteries. This is the hand phylactery. This is the head phylactery. And before we put on the phylacteries, we put on the prayer shawl every morning. Phylacteries are not used on Sabbath or on the holidays. I'll get to that in a moment. We use phylacteries only during the regular weekdays. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get up and I'm going to switch to another camera, and you're going to see me standing with the prayer shawl. And you're going to be learning some of the New Testament from the eyes of a Jew who understands what he's reading, because we understand where the New Testament came from. So here I'm looking at the other camera now, and you can see the prayer shawl. You see there are 4 fringes. And one of the very interesting stories from the New Testament, we're going to get to the origins of the prayer shawl in a moment, but one of the interesting things from the New Testament is the story from Luke 8, verses 43 and 44, about the woman with the issue of blood, endometriosis. And it says in Leviticus that any woman who is bleeding cannot be touched by any man, cannot even sit on the same chair, et cetera, et cetera. There are many, many different rules regarding this. And the woman was bleeding for 12 years. 12 years, she could not touch her husband or her children, if she had children, or her parents. She was basically worse than a leper. And she comes up from behind Jesus and she touches the fringe, the back fringe. Look at it. It says the back fringe of the prayer shawl. And she is healed immediately from her endometriosis. So this is something, when you see the prayer shawl, you understand what the woman did. And the woman did not touch Jesus. She touched the edge of the fringe, but he felt that he had been defiled by this woman. And again, you see this in Leviticus 15:19. Okay, so here's the prayer shawl. And there are other quotes also from the New Testament, but that's not the purpose of this program right now. Now, here's the phylacteries. And the heart of the program is regarding the phylacteries. The phylacteries are made of cowhide, which are put on a mold. And the arm phylactery goes here, right across from the heart. And we wrap it around. And then we go around the arm 7 times. That's the hand. I'm going to complete that in a moment. This is the headpiece, and this is like a crown. Just remember, this is all made of cowhide. You can see the sutures here. And if you open the sutures, you find inside 4 pouches with 4 different quotes, 2 from Exodus 13, which we're going to talk about, Deuteronomy 6 and Deuteronomy 11. This is the crown. Okay, and then we complete the process by wrapping around the fingers a certain way. And what we have done is we have written God's name. And most of you know that one of God's name is El Shaddai. And we have written Shaddai on our hand. Here you can see the Shin, the Dalid, and the Yud is here. And now I will resume sitting again. So you've seen this. And when I was in seminary, one of the dangerous things in seminary, any seminary, Jewish or Christian, is when you ask questions. And I asked the question, which got me into a lot of trouble. And I asked the professor, who was the one who gave us the quote about they make broad their phylacteries. See, this is a $400 phylactery. You've got $200 phylacteries and you've got $600 phylacteries. And what Jesus said was they make broad their phylacteries. This was a criticism. He wasn't saying do not put on the phylacteries. He was saying use the cheapest phylactery and give the rest of the money to the poor, because people were starving. And it wasn't important to Jesus to show off or be ostentatious. So anyway, so this is on our forehead. And you can see here, I've superimposed a phylactery over the black stone in Mecca, the Kaaba, because I believe, and I'm the only Jew in the world who is saying this, is that the phylacteries are in the image of the black stone in Mecca. And like I said earlier in the interview, the Saudis who have been writing to me are extremely blessed and extremely honored that a Jew says to them that the phylacteries are in the image of the black stone. And we'll get to that again as we go. And I definitely am not hating the Muslims or attacking the Muslims. All I'm saying is I'm looking for the truth. I want to understand the truth of our history. And so when I was in seminary, I asked my professor, I won't mention his name, but I have great regard for him, great professor. I said, when did we Jews begin to put on the prayer shawl? When did we begin to put on the phylacteries? And actually, the prayer shawl is later. The prayer shawl is in Numbers 15. So this is later. We're in the desert when we put on the prayer shawl. We're going to get to that. But the phylacteries are much earlier. They're already in Exodus 13. Exodus 13, the Israelites are slaves in the land of Egypt. We have not yet crossed the Red Sea. We have not yet been given the 10 Commandments. So when my professor said, oh, this goes back to the Mount Sinai and the 10 Commandments, I said, I don't think so. And my career as a rabbi was ended because I disagreed with the professor. I said, no, no, no. This goes back to when we were still in Egypt. We were still slaves. We were about to leave Egypt. But God says to Moses, speak unto the children of Israel and bid them that they make broad their phylacteries, that they wear phylacteries on their forehead and on their arm to be close to the heart. The forehead is to be close to the brain. And for those of you who are old enough, like I am, to remember what a gyroscope is, a gyroscope puts you on an even keel in the direction that you're going to be going. And for us, that was crossing the Red Sea and going over to Saudi Arabia. And one of the things that the Saudis were extremely impressed with when I spoke about the cube on our forehead, that is the black stone, is that we were leaving the pyramid of slavery of Pharaoh. Remember, the pyramids were in Egypt. The triangle represented slavery, and the cube represented our freedom in the desert. And so they were saying to me, you see, when you look at the dollar bill, you see the pyramid on the dollar bill. That's the one world government. That's the slavery of Pharaoh. So this is just a few weeks ago. I got an email from Saudi Arabia, very friendly, very scholarly. I was actually very, very honored, very appreciative that Saudis were watching what I was teaching and reading my book also. The story is, and this is where the story really begins. Moses, as you all probably know, kills the taskmaster when he's 40 years old. And then he has to flee. And where does he flee to? He flees to his cousin. This is not mentioned in the Bible, but we know that Jethro, the father-in-law to be of Moses, is descended from Midian. And Midian is one of the sons of Abraham. So Midian, Isaac, and Ishmael are all half brothers, all descended from Abraham. And so, contrary to what you see in the Cecil B. DeMille movie, I don't think that Moses was just stumbling and bumbling across the desert till he found this well with 7 girls. I think Moses knew exactly where he was going. He was fleeing from Egypt and going to his cousin Jethro. Jethro was the high priest of Midian. And one of the things that I'm sorry to say our rabbis don't know is that if you study Arabic and if you study geography in Arabic, you know that the 2 cities which are holy to the Muslims, Mecca and Medina, one of the names of Medina is Jethro, in Arabic, Yathrib. And so Jethro was a very, very important man, descended from Midian, descended from Abraham, just as Moses was descended from Abraham through Isaac. And when he marries Zipporah, who's actually now his second wife after the African wife he had, so now all of a sudden he becomes an understudy to Jethro. Jethro, the high priest of Midian. Don't forget Mecca as a city did not exist at that time. We're talking about 3,500 years ago. Uh, Jethro, his city was Medina. Medina is basically a giant oasis in the desert, and that's where the Midianites were based. The black stone was there. Nobody knows how the black stone got there. Some people say it was a meteorite. There are those modern age people who say that the UFOs brought in a black stone and put it there. There are all kinds of ideas, but it goes back to time immemorial. And the Muslims claim that Abraham and Ishmael refurbished the black stone. And so the black stone became a holy place for the pagans of the desert. And like I said before, there was a religion in Egypt of the pyramid, of slavery, of Pharaoh. Pharaoh was considered God at the head of a pantheon. Don't forget, the Egyptians, they prayed to the lion and the tiger and the crocodile and the snakes and to beetles and scarabs and all kinds of animals, unclean animals. And the Israelites, who were brought down to Egypt by Joseph, they actually worship when we see the golden calf, that is the child of the bull and the cow. And we were shepherds. So we were shepherds of bulls and cows. Therefore, our God was the bull and the cow. And the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf by Aaron was not really considered such a sin at that time. It was the people demanding the good old time religion, which was based on the moon and the cow. Don't forget, Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and he's gone for 40 days. There was no email, no telephone, no fax, no way that Moses could say that I'm up here 40 days and 40 nights. And so because he was so tardy in coming back, the Israelites demanded from the high priest Aaron to create for them a golden calf. A golden calf would basically not be male or female, but it would be the child of the cow and the bull. And Aaron says to them, "Here are your gods. Your gods," meaning the moon and the cow and the bull. So, as you all know, at age 80, Moses has a career change. He was 40 years in the desert with Jethro and Zipporah, and he would tend to the flocks. But he sees this burning bush in the desert, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, commonly known as God with a capital G, speaks to Moses and says, "Okay, you have to go back to Egypt and you have to confront Pharaoh and tell him, 'Let my people go.'" When Moses confronts Pharaoh, you have to remember Pharaoh is God for the Egyptians. And who is this Moses? Who is this shepherd coming in from Arabia? Everyone forgot that he had been there, 40 years before, that he had fled after killing the taskmaster. And God says to Moses, "Tell Pharaoh to let my people go." This is repeated 6 times in the book of Exodus. But the very first time is different than the other times. The very first time, God says, "Let my people go," according to the King James version of the Bible in English, so that they may celebrate the Lord in the desert. But in Hebrew, the word is Sheyahoguli Bamidbar. Now, the truth is that the word Hag in Hebrew means a holiday, but it has another meaning, and it means to go around in circles. So the question is, what does it mean to go around in circles? King James, of course, doesn't answer that. But when you know Hebrew, you know that the plane, when it's landing or it's flying around an airfield, we say Hamatos Hag. The plane is circling. Hug is a circle. It's all the same root in Hebrew. The word celebrate emanates from what I believe is the Hajj in Mecca. The Arabians would say Hajj, the Egyptians would say Hug, and the Jews would say Hag, which is all basically the same thing. It's kind of like in America, where Americans have a problem with the name Jose, and they don't say Jose, they say Jose, where the H and the guttural cha are interchangeable because Americans can't say the cha. So the same thing in Hebrew and in Arabic. In Hebrew, we say hog, and in Arabic, they say hajj or hag. So my first contention here is that Moses is leading the people out of Egypt to Arabia, to the Black Stone, to perform the Hajj. Now, today, when you hear about the Hajj, you think of Islam. But Islam basically took the pagan traditions of the pagans of Arabia and made it a Muslim holiday. And actually, the Israelites, when they crossed over from the Red Sea, they were supposed to be part of this. And so this is something, of course, that the rabbis deny and don't want to know about. But we were going from the pyramid of Egypt, the slavery of Egypt, to the cube, the freedom of the desert in Arabia. This is my theory here. And like I said, there are not too many people saying it, if at all. And so we go across the Red Sea. This is all before the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. And by the way, Mount Sinai is not in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, which is full of Egyptian soldiers. The real Mount Sinai is in northwest Arabia, in the Madian Mountains. What is Madian Mountains? Midian. Midian, Medina, Yathrib. So it's very clear to anyone who knows a little Arabic and a little bit of Arabic culture and religion that the place that we're going to was Mecca and Medina. Um, very, very important to understand that in Deuteronomy 2, verse 2, we're fast forwarding. I'm going to come back, but fast forwarding. God says to Moses, tell your people, enough being encamped on this mountain, turn north to the land of the Amorites, which is Israel, to the land that I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In other words, it wasn't God's intention to keep us permanently at that mountain where the Torah was given. And again, this is not Mount Sinai in Egypt. This is not Santa Catarina. A very interesting quote from the book of Galatians, two quotes actually from the book of Galatians. It says that Hagar and Mount Sinai, which are in Arabia. So this is something 2,000 years ago that was known already in the New Testament. Also, we see something else extremely interesting, that the Apostle Paul, after the Damascus Road revelation, does not go to Jerusalem to meet with the successors of Jesus. He goes straight to Saudi Arabia. Something very important, I believe, was happening spiritually in Saudi Arabia. But the truth is that the rabbinical authorities in Jerusalem, as well as the apostles of Jesus, were not really very happy with what was going on in Arabia at that time. It seems like there was a rival group of leaders, Jewish and Muslim and Christian, not Muslim, there were no Muslims at the time, Christians and Jews and pagans who still felt a very, very special feeling regarding Arabia. Very, very important to stress. The Israelites cross over the Red Sea. They arrive in Saudi Arabia. We see a very, very, very good documentation of Mount Sinai, the real Mount Sinai, by Jim and Penny Caldwell. Very, very special people, special friends of mine. And they've made many movies about this. They actually changed my life when I saw their movie. And that is that they found the real Mount Sinai. And one of the interesting things is that you speak to any of the Saudis, any of the Bedouin, and you ask them, where's the mountain of Moses, the real Mount Sinai? They all know where it is. And it's somewhere north of Mecca and Medina, south of Aqaba or Eilat, and to the west of the airfield, the Saudi airfield, Tabuk, which you might have heard of. So we're talking about a mountain maybe 200 miles away from the southern tip of Israel. This is where the real Mount Sinai is. Very interesting fact is that the heir apparent to the throne in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, wants to build a city there, and you should look this up. It's called Neom, N-E-O-M. And Neon is part Greek, part Arabic. Neo means new. Mustaqbal means future. And he wants to develop there a Disney park, Disney theme park of the real Mount Sinai, and to open it up to tourism of the Jews, Christians, and Muslims from all over the world. because it is a holy site and it is something that can draw tourists and capital into the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. By the way, something very small, which I forgot to mention earlier. When I was studying at seminary, I also, on my own, unbeknownst to the people in seminary, I went to Hebrew University to study Greek, classical Greek. And it was a very, very special time in my life because I was studying Greek philosophy. I was studying for the first time New Testament. As I said before, at seminary, our professor was teaching us verses from the New Testament. All of these things uh, opened up the brain of a person, me, totally unprejudiced in any direction because I knew virtually nothing about any of these things. So I was in synagogue on a Saturday morning talking to the president of the synagogue. That night, I was flying El Al to New York, and the president of the synagogue, unbeknownst to me, was also flying on the same flight. And we saw each other on the plane, and we were both standing in one of the aisles, and we started talking. I said, so he says to me, "Well, tell me what's new in the seminary." And I said, "Oh, it's the most wonderful time of my life because I'm also studying Greek at the university, and Greek philosophy and Jewish philosophy and New Testament, and I see such similarities in the genre and the style of what they're talking." And I was talking to the president of the synagogue for about 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden, this big, tall, strapping Greek Orthodox priest was sitting there, also stands up, 6 feet tall guy. And he says, "I've been listening to you." You know how it is in the plane that you overhear people speaking, even if you don't want to hear them, and even if you want to sleep, and have a loud, bellowing voice. And so this Greek Orthodox Christian priest said, "You're going to sit down with me, we're going to talk." So he grabs me, sits me down, and it's the most wonderful flight that I ever had on El Al to the States, because for 6 remaining hours, we were talking about different Jewish traditions and Greek traditions. And I was showing him the phylacteries that I'm showing you here. And he says to me, "You know, we Greek Orthodox priests also put on phylacteries." And I said to him, "Why do you put on phylacteries? That's a Jewish tradition." He said, "Jesus Christ put on phylacteries, and we Greek Orthodox priests want to emulate what Jesus did. And so we put on phylacteries also." So let me tell you, I have been trying unsuccessfully for decades now to get my hands on a pair of Greek phylacteries, and I have not succeeded. But from what this priest said, they put on a slightly different type of phylactery, which is an arm sleeve with latches and the headpiece. And they do it because Jesus did it. Remember, in Matthew 23, verse 5, Jesus does not say, "Do not put on phylacteries." He's saying, just don't be ostentatious. Don't make it broad, your phylacteries, because that means you're giving your money to ostentatiousness and not giving it to the poor who are starving. But it proves that Jesus put on phylacteries. And also, regarding the prayer shawl, um, as I said before, the woman with the issue of blood, with the endometriosis that we see in, Luke 8, verses 43 to 44, and she's healed for her faith. There's also a story of a girl who was given up for dead, and Jesus performs probably CPR, and kind of like the prophet Elisha with the little boy who was also given up for dead. And he says to the girl, "Talita kumi," which means, by the power of the talit, get up. And the young girl came back to life and she got up. So there is very, very great healing powers in this tassel. And a very important point in the book of Zechariah, verse 8:23, it says, "In those days where we are today, 10 men of all different languages will grab a hold of the Jewish man's tzitzit, and they will say, 'We will go with you.' Where? To Israel, because we know the Lord is with you." Where? In Israel. So here you see the tassel again. But what I wanted to do is share a little bit about the tassel and about the prayer shawl. If we look forward to the book of Numbers, chapter 15, we see a very interesting commandment to Jewish men to wear a prayer shawl with the 4 tassels to remind us not to go a whoring after the other gods. And we have to remember that in those days, the whole idea of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the whole idea of a God that you could not see, you could not feel, you could not touch, it's something that you had to believe in. That God was telling us not to go a whoring after the other gods and the other religions. Because in those days, the Canaanites and the Midianites and all Amalekites and all these others, and the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians, all these different pagan systems had sex at the center of their religious rituals. And God was trying to steer the Jewish men away from that. And so he said, wear the tassels on your garment to remind you not to go whoring after the other gods. This is in Numbers 15. So we also must not forget something else. In those days, um, you probably remember in Genesis 22, Abraham is commanded to sacrifice Isaac. And at the very last moment, God sees that Abraham passed the test and says, here is a ram, sacrifice the ram and not your son. And that was because in the good old days, rather the bad old days, we used to sacrifice children. And this is called offering your children on the fire altar of Molech. And all these religions, all these pagan religions were burning their children on the altar of Molech. And of course, this rampant sexual acts as a religion in the name of God is something that God does not like. And so God was steering us away from Egypt. And then when we went over to Arabia, he steered us away from the Black Stone, where the people were doing these horrible things. And he steered us north to the Mount Sinai, where we were for 38 years. And I believe we will return to Mount Sinai one day. Jewish and Christian forces will take that mountain and deliver it, because it's God's mountain, even though we have not been there for 3,500 years. Because we left that mountain, we came north to the land of Israel, even though we tarried 2 years in what is today Iraq and Jordan. Then we crossed over into the land of Israel about 1200 BC. And I know this is not the subject, but maybe it is slightly the subject. My son Aaron has done some very, very wonderful teachings about proving the veracity of the Bible and the entry into the land of Israel and the proto temples, the proto altars of the Israelites, where they would go around in circles 7 times around these temples, just as the Arabians would go around the Black Stone 7 times. And I think probably the Israelites did it too. And we wrapped the phylacteries on our arms 7 times. A lot of these things go back to the same thing. Another point, the menorah. You've all heard of the menorah, the symbol of Israel, a 7-branch candelabra. And an interesting thing, Mecca is not only Yathrib, it's called Medina, which is the name today, Minawara. Minawara means lit up. But if you look at the word Minawara, you see it's the menorah. And one of the things that Jim and Penny Caldwell found throughout the desert were menorahs etched into the rocks, footprints etched into the rocks. What my son discovered in his DVDs were the footprints, which were built up by these invaders, these Israelite invaders in the land of Israel. And there are about 7 of these footprints today. As you come across the Jordan River at the Yabok crossing point, and then going up to Nablus or Shechem, you also have a footprint up there on Mount Ebal. All of these places were proto-temple sites before the big temple in Jerusalem and before Shiloh. And one of the important points to stress is that many people who doubt, was there a Moses? Was there a Joshua? And that is that we found Adams Artal, famous archaeologist, found the altar of Joshua on Mount Ebal near Nablus, Shechem. An important point, which we find in the book of Judges. If you remember, this is a very, very important point. If you remember Phineas or Pinchas, the high priest, in the book of Numbers, there's a story about an Israelite prince, Zimri, having sexual relations with Cosbi. Cosbi was the daughter of Tsur. Tsur in Hebrew means the rock. In my opinion, the rock is the black stone in Mecca. And he skewered them in the middle of a sexual act. There had been a plague. 24,000 Israelites had died of this plague. And the moment that Phineas, the high priest, or rather the grandson of Aaron, skewers this Jewish and Midianite man and woman, the plague stops. A few chapters later, towards the very end of the book of Numbers, we see a massive desert battle in which five Midianite desert kings or chieftains come with their armies and are totally defeated by the Israelites. And it is after this that we go into the book of Deuteronomy and we find God saying to Moses, tell the children of Israel that it is enough to be encamped on this mountain 38 years. It is now time for the Israelites to move north to the land of Israel. Now, you know that the old generation died off in the desert, but Phineas is the grandson of Aaron, and he actually makes it into the land of Israel. And he officiates as the high priest where? In Bethel. And my son also made a DVD about Bethel. And Phineas Pinchas is the high priest at this time there. He's very ruthless, actually, very faithful to God in what he was doing. But it all proves the time frame mentioned in the Bible, and that there were, of course, the children and grandchildren who did not die within the 40 years of those who left Egypt. And they came into the land of Israel. They crossed over from Jordan into Yabok crossing. And that's how the Israelites began to get settled in the land of Israel. So I just wanted to share these few things with you. Again, the Bible is true. The things that God says in the Bible are true, but you have to know how to read not only what it says in the Bible, but to read between the lines and not necessarily, and probably not, follow what certain rabbis said, excuse me, over a period of 3,500 years. But the Bible is not just a historiographic book, it is also a history book. And the things that it says are true. And so I'm very, very happy to have been given this opportunity to share with you. And I hope indeed that you will, as soon as this COVID-19 business is finished, get on the planes and come over to Israel and enjoy walking in the land of the Bible, in the land of God, and feeling that you now hold the crown of God in your hands, not just look at it in a picture book. And so that's the great thing about what we have here living in Israel. We live the Bible every day living here in Israel, and we invite you to join us also. And so God bless all of you. God bless Pastor Gary Stearman. God bless Bob Ulrich and Tyler Wood and the whole group. We love you all. We miss you all. And just to let you know, I'm working on my 8th book, which I hope will be ready in January. I hope to come back in January, and it will be called Lepanto 2. Look up Lepanto, Lepanto. Lepanto 1 was 1571, in which the Spanish Catholic fleet sank the whole Turkish Islamic fleet. I'm talking now about something like this happening a second. So the book is called Lepanto 2, Turkey and the Armageddon. And so we're going to be talking about the rise and fall of Ottoman Turkey, and then the rise again now under Erdogan, and its final fall in the Battle of Armageddon. That's going to be my 8th book, God willing. So I hope to see you all back in the States, January, February, March. If we have elections, as you know, I'm head of the Bible Block Party. So I'm going to have to campaign and then come immediately after the elections, unless I'm elected to the Knesset. So we shall have to see where God takes us in March. God bless all of you, and shalom.